Regardless of the fact that it's closing, Tina has had an undeniably impressive run in the West End. To still be around 7 years after it opened is a fantastic achievement, and everyone who has been responsible for that should be incredibly proud. Mary. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel, or hello to you if you are listening to this on podcast platforms. My name is MickeyJo, and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional theatre critic here on social media. I am also a content creator and a pundit, and today we are going to be talking about the news that Tina, the Tina Turner musical, based on the life of Tina Turner, the late great rock and roll icon, and using, of course, her songbook in order to tell her story, will close later this year in the West End at the Aldwych Theatre, some 7 years after it first opened there. Now, there's lots to discuss about this. We're going to talk through the official press release which has been released. It also prompts questions about the exact circumstances of why Tina is closing, because in some ways this is anticipated, but it's also closing prior to the fulfillment of the full booking period that had been put on sale. So, you know, they had demonstrably been hoping to run just a little bit longer. The show has recently also commenced its first UK tour, running concurrently with the London production. And there are also one or two things that this tells us about the industry right now and where we are, particularly when it comes to jukebox musicals. Finally, we can speculate just a little bit, because I haven't heard anything official, rumour or otherwise, about what might be going into the Aldwych next. I have some theories, and I'll share some of those with you at the end. In the meantime, let's talk about Tina taking her final bow in London. As always, I would love to know what you thought in the comments section down below. Feel free to share your favourite memories of going to see Tina, the Tina Turner musical. I saw the show twice at the Aldwych, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the stronger jukebox biomusicals. I think the role of Tina Turner is one of the most demanding in the world of musical theatre right now. I think it's insanely demanding in terms of the physicality and the vocals and the characterization and the acting that is required. It's this really incredible feat. And as always, if you enjoy this and you want to stay up to date with all of the West End and Broadway theatre news, as well as all of my various theatre reviews, make sure that you are subscribed right here on YouTube with the notifications turned on, or following me on other social media or podcast platforms. In the meantime, let's talk about it. Why exactly is Tina, the Tina Turner musical, closing in the West End? So let's begin with the official press release. I was actually at the gala performance of the comedy about spies this evening at the Noel Coward Theatre. Stay tuned for that review coming very soon. But just shortly before that performance began, this was sent out, with the press team having distributed the news: Tina, the Tina Turner musical, to close in the West End after 7 triumphant years, and that it's booking at the Aldwych Theatre now only until Saturday the 13th of September 2025, when previously I believe that it had been booking into January of the new year. Yeah, back in April when they announced Fleur East joining the cast, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment because I think it's a little bit revealing. They had extended the booking period to the 10th of January 2026. And I often describe the closure of long-running shows like this, like anything upwards of 3 or 4 years being a long-running show, theatrically speaking, as kind of landing the plane gracefully. Like, the show, for the most part, will probably have recouped by this point. They'll have made their money back. It will have been successful. And so, you know, a closure doesn't have to be a sad, sudden, shocking thing. It can be a graceful landing of the plane, keeping the brand intact and making everything look like, you know, the final chapter of a great success. And it's just that, you know, earlier closing than the booking period extension that makes this look a little bit less like, you know, that was the situation, and a little bit more like the show kind of ran out of steam. Now, I said we'd circle back to talking about the casting of Fleur East, who was recently announced to join the show as one of 2 actresses to share the role of Tina Turner. It's such a demanding role that that's usually how they do things ever since Adrienne Warren, who originated the role, left the production. But Fleur, who is a popular recording artist, through a cynical lens, could have been considered stunt casting, which one could have interpreted as a little bit of a red flag for the show's box office success. As a reminder, we do not release weekly box office grosses or any of that kind of information here in the UK, so we can only speculate really about how well a show is doing based on word of mouth and based on ticket availability. And with that being said, it actually looked a few years ago, based on the availability of tickets and the kind of offers that were going around, like Tina might have been slowing down, but then something happened that, you know, sadly but truly afforded them a little bit more life and longevity. And that was the sad passing of Tina Turner. And obviously, you know, that reframed the show in a different context, because it then allowed her fans, and there are so many of them, to go to the show and celebrate her life and her artistry and her music in the wake of her death. And with any kind of a biographical piece, I think it's a sad reality that it's going to gain a little bit more interest and popularity and momentum after someone passes away. I'm sure that that happens with written biographies about individuals after they've died. But going back to the stunt casting concept, I don't need to tell you that this is something that we see occasionally in struggling shows where they want to put celebrities or people with a little bit of interest or more name recognition into the show to try and get a wider pool of people to go and see it, to buy tickets. Trying to reach out beyond the usual crowd of theatre fans, let's say, or the people who have been interested in the show thus far. And we see this on a variety of different levels, and the term stunt casting only really gets utilised when it's people from outside of the theatrical sphere who don't necessarily have that kind of a background or experience necessarily, and that's not even that true of Fleur East, nor some of the other actresses who have been hired to play Tina, because there have been a couple, including Karis, including Zoe Burkett, who have come from that recording artist world. And in terms of the stamina that you need and the vocals that you need in order to play Tina, as well as, you know, really understanding her and everything that she went through in a very difficult industry, I think coming from that world actually probably empowered those performances to be terrific. But given the timing of all of this, one narrative does certainly seem to make a lot of sense, and that would be Fleur East being cast in the show, this being announced back in April. She was going to go in for a limited time, see if this, you know, boosted the box office enough that the show looked healthy enough to run into the new year, and perhaps that didn't necessarily happen to the extent that producers wanted. Or maybe there are other factors here and they wanted to go out with a bang. Or maybe there are completely different factors here involving the theatre owners. Sometimes they get to make decisions about the tendencies of different shows, and it's not just up to those shows' producers, and maybe this casting choice was completely coincidental. This is all only speculative. For something a little bit more concrete, here are some official statements around the show's closure. The producers of the hit West End production Tina, the Tina Turner musical, based on the life of legendary artist Tina Turner and produced in association with Tina Turner herself, are announcing the musical's closure in the West End at the Aldwych Theatre on Saturday the 13th, 2025. We know this already. The musical has been running in the West End for over 7 years, making it the longest running show to ever play at the Aldwych Theatre, where it has broken all box office records, and it is in the top 10 longest running musicals performing in the West End. All very true. Stage entertainment producer Tali Pellman said, "The decision to close our West End production has been extremely difficult. Celebrating and sharing Tina's legacy has meant so much to all of us who have been working on this show over the last decade. We are proud to have fulfilled Tina's dream for the musical, which was to serve not only as a reminder of her work, but as the beating heart of her empowering message: courage, indomitable spirit, and an eternal optimism in what is possible." And, you know, her story is so remarkable, it certainly does do that. They go on to say, "We are grateful to our exceptional authors and creatives, to the many extraordinary women who have played this phenomenal role on the Aldwych stage, to the casts, musicians, production and backstage teams, and to the countless others who have dedicated themselves to the London production over the past 10 years. We are delighted that the show is selling out on tour across the UK and Ireland, congrats to them, and continues to elate audiences in productions across North America, Europe and around the world. In London, this will be a summer of celebration led by our glorious duo of Karis Anderson and Fleur East in our final West End cast." And they are truly going out with a bang. Now, there are a few more things I want to remark on in response to that, but before I forget to mention it, yes, they have recently launched a tour to run concurrently with the West End production, and, you know, this isn't something, I've said this a lot recently, but this isn't something that happened really, as far as I recall, 10, 15 years ago. It was only the really successful shows that could run a tour while also running the West End production, because if you think about it, if you're going to send the show touring around the UK, all of those regional audiences who might have been travelling up on a coach, on a train, on a day trip to go and see Tina in the West End, they're not going to. They're going to wait until it comes to Milton Keynes or Southampton or Birmingham or a theatre nearer to where they are. Even if it's not completely local to them, it's probably nearer to them than London. So you're really diluting the market to a certain extent. And nowadays, it's not just Tina. We see a lot of shows doing this. Matilda does this. The Book of Mormon does this. Hamilton is so incredibly popular still that the London production continues to do well, while you have a tour playing these really extended runs in different major cities. Possibly it's been discovered that there wasn't quite enough of an audience there to sustain simultaneous West End and touring productions of Tina, and maybe the tour going out, and being advanced for many venues ahead of time, many months in advance, has, lowered the number of people travelling to London to go and see this show. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Claude, who is in the company of the Tina UK tour. We did a amateur production of Sister Act together. She is amazing, and I hope that I get to see the tour and see her in it, because she's so talented, and it's really cool that I know someone who's doing that show. But back to the business of it all, I do want to talk about the other productions of Tina worldwide in comparison with the London production, but it's worth really highlighting that even though we're discussing the show's final chapter, it has been hugely successful in the West End. As they said, the longest running production ever at the Aldwych, breaking box office records, currently in the top 10 longest running musicals in the West End. As mentioned here, Tina the Tina Turner musical opened at the Aldwych Theatre in London's West End in 2018 before a global rollout that brought the show to sold-out audiences across the world. The musical has been seen by over 8 million people worldwide. That's a huge number. In North America, the Broadway production opened in November 2019 and was nominated for 12 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. The North American tour continues to run in its third year and can currently be seen across North American cities. Recently finished touring across Australia, where it broke historic box office records at the Princess Theatre in Melbourne and enjoyed sold-out seasons in Sydney, in Perth, in Brisbane. In Europe, there have been productions at Stargard Operettenhaus in Hamburg, Germany, the Apollo Theatre in Stuttgart, Germany, of course Tina Turner, very big in Germany, as well as the Beatrix Theatre in Utrecht, Netherlands, and at the Teatro Coliseum in Madrid, in Spain. And in February 2026, the musical will open in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Shout out to you, Sao Paulo, Brazil, marking its 11th worldwide first-class production. I mean, not every show gets this kind of an international rollout, as they said. So that is another huge success. And of all of these, none of these productions have run as long thus far as the London one. Certainly it didn't last quite as long on Broadway. I do wonder if the Broadway production would have had a little bit of a boost from Tina Turner's passing if it had still been running at that time. There was also the pandemic of it all that made everything a little bit challenging. The London production having been one of many musicals to be opened before that, to reopen subsequently and come out successfully the other side. And that in and of itself is also a fact that we still have to talk about, because it has semi-permanently affected the way that people go out into the world and the demographics of audiences who are willing to travel into London to go to the theatre, not to mention, as we so often do when we're having conversations about show closures, the cost of living crisis, everything getting a little bit more expensive. In many ways, the world is on fire. So, it's not everyone's first priority necessarily to go and see a Tina Turner musical. But the thing that I want to really pay attention to here, and I alluded to this previously, I kind of tentatively suggested that the way that we see jukebox musicals in the industry might be shifting a little bit. And, they may not have the same kind of box office guarantee and staying power that they did even a few years ago. And if London seemed like a place where jukebox musicals were a little more likely to thrive than on Broadway, I don't know that it necessarily is anymore. Yes, Tina has run for far longer in the West End than it did on Broadway, but several recent jukebox musical openings haven't really been able to gain a strong foothold. We talked in the last few years about the early closures of Ain't Too Proud and of The Drifter's Girl, and I'm wondering how long MJ is going to run at the intimidatingly large Prince Edward Theatre. Part of me wonders if it's not going to have the same kind of extended life that the other Michael Jackson musical Thriller Live did in the West End. Very different types of shows, very different sizes of theatres, and Michael Jackson as an artist has a very different brand perception and legacy than Tina Turner. But I do feel as though it's worth noting this slight shift that we seem to be experiencing experiencing away from the jukebox musical. Is that happening because more people are getting interested in theatre because of the success of shows like Six and people getting excited about original scores again? I would love to hope that that is the reason. Is this because audiences are starting to skew a little bit younger after the pandemic? There's annual data around a lot of this, but never quite as comprehensive as I want it to be, because I want to really get into the details here of exactly what we're looking at and exactly what is happening. There is a big part of me that does wish that the West End box office grosses were released, even though that would open a whole can of worms and chaos. But I'm very intrigued as to what other people think here. Let me know in the comments section. Do you think that we are moving away from jukebox musicals, just separate to your own opinion about them? Do you think that we are seeing them gradually becoming a little bit less successful? Or is the notion of what makes a show ongoingly successful entirely separate to whether or not it's a jukebox musical? After all, you know, Tina did better in the West End than on Broadway, but something like & Juliet continues to run on Broadway and didn't last as long as people thought that it might in the West End. Finally, with the utmost respect to the company and the crew and the creatives and everyone working at the Aldwych and outside of the Aldwych on Tina, the Tina Turner musical, let's spend a little moment considering what might be next for this theatre. Now, the Aldwych is an interesting West End house. It isn't necessarily considered prime real estate from a geographical perspective. It's out down the end of the Strand, just beyond the Novello and the Savoy Theatre, but it's well situated in terms of tourist footfall, and it's never been a home of particularly long runners. It has been a home to musicals, however. And the West End has a major problem at the moment that I've mentioned several times, where a lot of shows have opened and then gone on to run for a decent number of years. And there aren't that many venues available for new shows, particularly for musicals, particularly for large musical productions, to come to the West End, because the Adelphi has been the home to Back to the Future for a few years now. Mean Girls is closing at the Savoy, but when Paddington opens up later this year, you have to imagine that that bear is going to be in that theatre for a really long time. Moulin Rouge at the Piccadilly, Cabaret at the Kit Kat Club, the Playhouse used to regularly turn over, and now not so much. Even Hadestown opening up at the Lyric. Six at the Vaudeville. A lot of theatres that used to have different limited runs, things going in, things going out. Now it's really kind of down to the Playhouses to occasionally house musicals, while the bigger musical houses are pretty much just the home of ongoing long-running shows. Even Operation Mincemeat taking over from The Woman in Black. You know, one long runner leaves, another one arrives. And so the Aldwych coming back into play is really interesting. The theatre has a capacity of just over 1,000. It is owned by the American company, the Nederlander Organisation, who also own the Dominion Theatre in the West End, and they co-own the Adelphi along with LW Theatres. And with the size of the space and the size of the auditorium, it's not necessarily just small shows that we could be anticipating here. You know, when the Criterion's looking for a new tenant, or a theatre like the Fortune, or one of the smaller houses, or even like the Garrick, we would tend to look at like transfers from off West End, but something like the Aldwych, this could be a bigger show, which makes it an exciting conversation. Now, there's a working theory here, because a couple of Andrew Lloyd Webber written musicals have made their world premiere here over the past couple of decades. I think Whistle Down the Wind was first produced here. Stephen Ward definitely was. There is the possibility that this is going to be the West End home of his upcoming musical, to be directed by Jamie Lloyd, The Illusionist. I've covered this in previous news recaps, and I remarked at the time that there really weren't that many options in terms of theatres where he could open this show. The Gillian Lynn, where he opened Cinderella, is now the home of My Neighbor Totoro, perhaps for a very long time, because that show is another one that has been very successful. And so it sort of seems like there are really only two options as to where The Illusionist could open. And if the Adelphi still isn't free by late next year, which is when Lloyd Webber has suggested the show might begin based on the availability of director Jamie Lloyd, who is a very busy man with his fingers in many different theatrical pies, then it seems like it could be the Aldwych, but that still leaves us a conspicuous amount of time. And, you know, it's interesting that Tina is making the decision to close at the end of the summer and not run into the new year. This seems to indicate that potentially the show doesn't necessarily have the advance to continue on past September, or that there is an exciting and viable new production that's going to come in and be very successful over Christmas, which is a great time for many West End shows. A lot of great business over Christmas and then horrible business in January, which is why you usually see a lot of shows closing in early January, like in the first few days, but with a possibility of perhaps 10 months in the West End available here, I really don't know which shows we could be talking about. I have heard rumours of a show like Kinky Boots coming into the West End after its national tour, and that's a show that sold out the venues on its tour, so that wouldn't be considered a surprise. Could we see a transfer for a regional musical that really invested in their 1-month world premiere run, like A Knight's Tale? I think that's definitely trying to find a home somewhere in the West End. Is the Aldwych big enough for that massive production, for jousting on stage, for everything that they do? I don't know. Could we see a quick surprise transfer from a regional or off West End venue? Could we see a return of something like 222, A Ghost Story, that seems to go into all of these vacant houses as soon as there is availability, just to plug a gap between other shows? The Aldwych is one of the few theatres they haven't yet played in the West End. At this point, I can only speculate because I haven't heard anything more solid than that. Could we see a transfer of a Broadway show that had been waiting for its chance to play in London? If The Illusionist is already set to happen here next year, then the window would be finite, so perhaps that's not as attractive to a Broadway show that might be hoping to run for a long time. But something like Some Like It Hot, that talked about coming to the West End, even though that talk seems to have gone cold. I've heard rumours of Water for Elephants coming over, but this isn't the theatre that I've heard about it being attached to. Potentially Shucked finding a home after its current run at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. The ticket prices are very low right now over in Regent's Park, which seems to indicate that they have a future commercial run planned somewhere, and that this is really just an enthusiastic tryout for the show. Inevitably, the answer is I do not currently know, but I invite you to speculate along with me in the comments section down below. Which show or shows could we see heading into the Aldwych after Tina closes later this year? And while you're in the comments section, in celebration of the brilliant Tina, the Tina Turner musical, why not share your favourite memory of seeing the show? And if you haven't seen the show yet and you weren't particularly interested in it, I'm here to tell you, even as someone who is not always thrilled by a bio jukebox musical, I think this show is really emotionally impactful, and the music is so stirring, and the central performance, whoever it has been, has always been incredibly impressive to me. I think it's definitely a show that you need to see before it closes in the West End. And now you only have a few months left, so make sure that you catch it. In the meantime, those are all of my thoughts on the closing of Tina in the West End. Congratulations once again to the companies, the crews, the creatives, and everyone else working in and for the production over the last 7 years. It's been a really triumphant success at the Aldwych, and I wish the show continued success on its UK tour and around the world. Thank you so much for listening to this theatrical news recap. I hope that it's been interesting, and I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!